All righty. Well, hi, everyone. Glad to be here. I'm glad so many people have joined us tonight. Tonight we have a very special guest speaker, Laura Erickson. Laura is the 2014 recipient of the American Birding Association's prestigious Roger Torrey Peterson Award. She has worn many hats as a scientist, teacher, writer, wildlife rehabilitator, especially for nighthawks, professional blogger, public speaker, photographer, and science editor at Cornell Lab of Ornithology. She's written 12 books about birds, including her most recent in 2020. And tonight's topic, The Love Lives of Birds, which I might add is available at the house on Monroe Avenue, as well as a couple of her other books is available there. So please check them out. She is currently a columnist and contributing editor for Birdwatching magazine. And since 1986, she has been producing the long-running For the Birds radio program for many public radio stations. She comes to us tonight from Duluth, Minnesota. Please give a warm welcome to Laura Erickson.
Well, I'm
Laura,
thrilled. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm going to start sharing my. Can you hear me? Go like this if you can hear me. Okay. I have to take just 1 second to share screen. And play from start. Okay. I'm talking about my newest book, but it's January, and the American Birding Association just named their Bird of the Year, the pileated woodpecker. And I have to comment on this because I may be one of the only people in the known universe who has ever French kissed in the ear by a pileated woodpecker. When I was a rehabber back in the 80s and 90s, I ended up with one fledgling pileated that got hit by a car probably on its maiden voyage, and it couldn't, one wing was sprained. And we had to slowly hack it out near the boundary waters. But during the time I had him, he loved sitting on my arm with his beak right next to my ear, and he would stick out that long slurpy tongue going through all the folds in my ear. It must have been a most optimistic pileated, thinking there were bugs in there, but it was incredibly gentle about it. My kids didn't like it when he sat on their shirts because they just wear little thin t-shirts, and they really do have sharp claws. Just hanging onto the shirt felt a little yucky. I don't have a picture of him on my shoulder. I had to use another pileated woodpecker, one in my yard, to demonstrate what the tongue actually looks like. But so because of that pileated connection, I'm thrilled that that's the bird of the year. And I'm living right now with my daughter and son-in-law who migrated here or refugeed here from New York City because of the pandemic. And my daughter was pregnant, so I have my little grandson here. And I found out 2 weeks before Christmas, I had made the Christmas stocking that is next to him, and I wanted something to put into it. So I Googled baby teething toy binoculars, and voila. So that's my little Walter. And I also gave him the first bird book that I ever had, which my grandpa gave me, the Golden Stamp Book of Birds, which I found on eBay. So that's the kid. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about birds and their love lives. And some of the I'm using my own photos mainly and artwork from the book, but I'm also using a lot of photos that came from my book that Mari Reed and I did a few years ago, Into the Nest. If I use a picture from this book, you will see on the bottom a little picture of the book, and it'll say who the photographer was. Otherwise, they're my pictures. Birds, we talk about the birds and the bees like everybody intuitively knows what birds do and bees do to make new little babies. But birds are incredibly varied. One time I was giving a program at a nursing home. And at the end of my program, this sweet little old lady in a wheelchair raises her hand very tentatively. And when I called on her, she said, I have been wondering something for 87 years. How do birds, how do they, well, how do they do it? And so I explained about bird sex. But birds, most male birds do not have a penis or anything that actually intrudes into the female. They have an opening called a cloaca, and so do females. And the sperm goes out the males into the females to fertilize the eggs. And ornithologists romantically call that the cloacal kiss. And once birds do it, they have a whole lot of different procedures for getting ready to do it. And it all depends on what that bird's life is like that will determine what their love life is like. Some birds, like swans, it's a till death do us part kind of thing. And so one of the birds I talk about in the book is the trumpeter swan. And it's just the two of us. They are so sociable in winter. If you see swans in the winter, if you're seeing tundra swans, they can be in huge flocks. If you're seeing trumpeter swans, it's still smaller flocks in the east because they have, they were extirpated and they're recovering, but swans hang out all winter together. But in the end of winter, their hormones, as the days are lengthening, their hormones are starting to rev up. An adult pair who have been together since the previous year have their babies with them all winter. But when their hormones kick in right around anniversary time, they start feeling romantic and now they want to get away from the kids. And that's what they do. They go to their own nesting area to breed. They start getting really, they're always, swans are always, quote, in love. They are always devoted to and sticking by their mate. They're an excellent choice if you're buying a wedding card for people that you actually hope will stay together for a long time. They just are, they mimic each other's movements and they just stick together. And as they get romantic, they don't act romantic too much while they're with all those other swans. They like some privacy. And when they finally get off to their own lakes, some of them have the staining on them, depending on whether they're in water that has a lot of iron in the sediment, and it will stain their feathers and give them a whole different look. So the romantic breeding swans, I took this in spring of a nesting pair, and that's what they look like I think this was in Ohio, and it was near Toledo, and there's enough iron in the muck that they start looking a little mucky. But once they go onto their territorial lake, the same swans that were swimming in big flocks that included geese and ducks suddenly do not want anyone around. They want absolute privacy, and they are extremely aggressive in defending their part of the lake, and they want their part of the lake to be a big part of the lake. Here's a family of swans. That's the whole reason that they are so territorial. It takes a lot of food for these baby swans, which started out egg size, to get full grown within a couple of months. And they do not want to share their food resources. The parents and young stay together through the summer, through fall migration, through the winter, and then the babies are on their own, but they all know how to migrate on their own now. They've learned all the lessons they need from their parents, and they stick around with other young swans. Usually takes them a few years before they reach sexual maturity and start being ready to pair off themselves. But their romance is all year round, even though their sexual behavior is only during the time that they're raising baby, that before they've laid the eggs and during the time they're laying the eggs. Then they're just devoted, but it's platonic for the rest of the year. Now, some birds are just not the marrying kind, and that would include mallards. The word mallard is an old word. Mallards are found in, all over the northern hemisphere naturally. And the word mall comes from masculine or male. The ard is pejorative, like drunkard or sluggard, because when they were named, people had already observed that mallards exude the worst kind of masculinity. Male mallards, the drakes, will mate with anything that will hold still long enough to let them. I've watched them try to mate with a rock. That's just the way they are. They get very romantic in the winter, the males doing all kinds of displaying. And the females are, there's more males than females. The female wants the most attractive male she can find, which she defines as the male who spends so much time right next to her that she figures he's the one most likely to protect her from the other males, because they do what is actually called forced copulation, where they will have, 3 or 4 or 5 males all trying to mate with the same poor female. If her mate has abandoned her, she's defenseless pretty much. So you see them, you always see more males than females, and they're all kind of milling about and doing all their displaying. They do a lot of this in the winter. Then the male that the female has accepted follows her back to where she hatched out. We may have a female from Rochester and a male from Duluth who meet up somewhere in a marsh in Louisiana, and he will follow her back to Rochester. So there's all this genetic mixing with mallards because they're really promiscuous. They pick a different mate every year, and the males move about to where the females came from. So there's a lot of mixing. But the males are just all doing that. Notice they're all doing it to show off for one female. Now, these are male mallards who are trying to make it with this poor eider who spent the winter lost up in Superior, Wisconsin, and they didn't care. There are records of hybrids between mallards and just about every species of duck because the males are so indiscriminate. But once they finally pair off, he stays very tight at her side as much as he can, but he can't help occasionally eyeing the chick next door. So occasionally he will leave her and he'll go mate with another female. And so if you take blood samples of all the little baby mallards in a clutch, there's like a 48% probability that more than one male is involved. And that's in the prairie pothole areas where they're kind of spaced. In urban areas, it's probably much higher than that there is multiple paternity. More than one male has mated with that female. But he wants to stay by her. If you think about the eggs in the oviduct, one they get fertilized way up at the top where the egg is released from the ovary and it goes down this tube. It has to be fertilized at the top because as it goes down the tube, that is secreting, first of all, the proteins that make the albumin, and then the calcium stuff that will make the shell. And it has to be fertilized before any of that happens. But every time an egg comes through, it pushes out everything else that's in the cloaca and in the oviduct. And so he's got to mate with her every day to make sure he has fresh sperm in there for the next egg. She ovulates about once a day until she has a full clutch. But they seem so romantic when you write books. She's not sitting on the eggs until she has the full clutch. So every day she goes over to the nest, lays a new egg, and then they go off for the day. She covers it with some feathers that she plucked from her own down. And then they stay away from the nest until the next morning when she lays another. And this is what the goal is, to lay, 10, 12, sometimes 14 eggs. And then as soon as she has laid the full clutch, his work is done. She's not interested in mating anymore, so he goes off. That charming children's book, Make Way for Ducklings, uh, totally gets the story wrong, because he just goes off and leaves her entirely with Jack, Cack, Lack, Mack, Mack, Oack, Pack, and Quack. And she's on her own. She's a single mother. So with mallards, this is what you see. You never see the male and female and the little stream of ducklings. And she's just very devoted, and she has to do all the work while he goes off, joins other males. They molt. The males are all kind of together as they're molting their flight feathers. They go through a short flightless period, and she won't molt until the babies are bigger, but she can't leave them. She doesn't want to fly anyway. So she'll be molting before they can fly. So they're all kind of in danger together. But that's mallards. And another bird that is not the marrying kind is the turkey. Turkeys are kind of interesting because during the winter, they split up into two male flocks and female flocks. And the only mixing there is that there are young males, the ones that hatched last summer, will be with the females until they suddenly realize that they want to be with the boys and they leave. So by the end of winter, there's no young males usually in the female flocks. They just have totally different flocks for the winter. And the males are all kind of displaying for each other, and the females are just kind of eating and trying to stay safe. And then the females seem to like the most bullyish males there are, but they hedge their bets. They don't just want the top football players. They will hedge their bets by mating with other males too when they can get away with it. So the turkey clutches very often have more than one father on the eggs that are genetically all the same mothers. But they just strut around the males, and the females look for the guys who are the most dominant when they're displaying. And this is the only turkey nest I ever took a picture of, so I had to throw it in there. But that's the whole point. And then she's entirely raising the babies on her own. Most states that have turkey hunting seasons have a spring season. And that is because the males are so bullyish, they will hurt the little poults or turkey chicks. And so once the females are done laying and are going to be raising the babies, a hunting season won't hurt the reproduction for that year. Now, swans have that romantic till death do us part, but another excellent choice for a wedding card would be a pigeon. Pigeons are extremely devoted to their mate and their home, and that is why people have exploited them for centuries, carrying messages, because they could take them from their mate and their loft and let them go, and they'll make a beeline back for it. And they have been shot lost a leg and been badly wounded and still struggled and made it to rescue people during World War One and World War Two. And it's astonishing how devoted they are. But they're also a good example of Sex in the City. They are very romantic in cities. That's the place where we think of them as the most abundant, in cities and on farms. They're shockingly beautiful if they weren't what a lot of people just want to call sky rats. We've had pigeons in America since the earliest settlers from Europe who brought them on the ships, and the pigeons didn't fly away. They could use them for fresh meat on ships, but also people kept them for meat. When it's baby pigeons, they called it squab, but also because they could breed them into fancy, pretty different breeds, and because they carry things, they're homers, and so they could have contests for homing. And so pigeons are very popular among a lot of people that are not birders. But they are very, very devoted, and they pick a mate and they stick with it. When my brother was a little boy, when he was about 10, he caught a pigeon, the first one stupid enough to walk into a paper bag filled with bird seed. And then he just closed the bag and brought him home and named him Rocky. And Rocky won a bunch of homing races. But Jimmy got a magazine subscription for something for pigeon fanciers and started actually buying expensive pairs of pigeons to breed. And Rocky kept mating with his other females and contaminating the bloodlines. And all Jimmy had to do is go back to a railroad, trap a female, and bring her, so Rocky would have his own mate, and he would have left all the other pigeons alone. But a guy's got to do what a guy's got to do. Um, they've done all kinds of research. Some studies have shown that pigeons prefer a mate who has the same kind of plumage, but other studies have said no, they don't. They like a bird of a totally different kind of plumage. These are both pairs that I photographed in my own backyard, and they I can't see a pattern. And I don't think people have had a really good chance at finding out how much it's influenced by what other pigeons are available to choose as a mate. But they're very romantic. They build their nests where it's hard to find them, in crevices on bridges and where people have an opening into their attic that they should close off and things like that. They are numerous. They're a human health problem, and they're a problem as far as corroding uh, bridges and all kinds of human made structures. At Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn, New York, there used to be pigeons at the entrance. Now there's monk parakeets, which are way, way louder, but the groundskeepers like them much more. And the New York Times asked the groundskeepers why they like them so much more than pigeons. And they said because they don't leave this whitewash that is corroding the brickwork and stuff. So there you have it. But their whole point is to raise babies. Pigeons do everything right out in the open except their babies. Very few people have seen baby pigeons while they're still in the nest. They're very secretive about them. And it's sort of like, I was making the comparison in the book. The pigeons are the big urban Sex in the City actor type things, but they want to keep their home life off out of the way of the camera. So another bird that is not the marrying kind is the hummingbird. And I'm talking just about every species of hummingbird, but especially including our ruby-throated hummingbird. They have no bond between the male and female during the nesting season, and they don't winter together. They just live on their own. What I call them are Rosie the Riveter birds. The males are off fighting a war. They're always in combat. And while they're off fighting the war, it's the females doing all the responsibilities on the home front. And so she's the one who finds the nest site, builds the nest, and raises the babies. And the male, we think, well, then he's not doing anything except having sex with her, but he has an extremely important job. The male hummingbird, like most raptors, is smaller than the female. She's bigger. And males, I've watched a male ruby-throated hummingbird chase a bald eagle. The hummingbird, I had my scope on him, and he was sitting on a little spot on my mother-in-law's the telephone wire to her house, and he's sitting there. All of a sudden he starts chittering and looking really agitated, and I look up the way he's looking, and there's a bald eagle. And when the bald eagle crossed over into his column of defended airspace, zoom, he went up, started dive bombing the eagle on the back, on the nape of his neck, up, down, like a little yo-yo. And I don't even think the eagle noticed the little twerp. Eagles weigh about, I think I calculated it as 1,600 times as much as a male ruby-throated hummingbird. But the eagle was going that way anyway. So as soon as he crossed out of the column of defended airspace, the hummingbird gets back to the exact spot on the wire. I could tell that because I had it in my spotting scope. And now he's like puffed up and looking around, so proud that he chased that away. Well, what good is that to the females? The eagle doesn't represent any problem, but the male chases everything. He chases bees out of the flowers, he chases other hummingbirds away, and that helps the female because she is on that tiny nest with the two pea-sized eggs. Up here in Duluth, when they start nesting, we're having nights still down in the 30s, once in a while down in the 20s. And she wants to be off that nest for the shortest possible time. And she can accomplish that if there's nobody else fighting her for the flowers. And the male's fighting for the flowers, right? But the one thing he doesn't fight is her. She flares those white spots on her tail, and whoop, he's gone. He'll let her, he'll defer to her. So that's his job. He's off fighting the war. She's keeping the home fires burning. And here I have some pretty cool pictures of hummingbirds growing up in the nest. The female does all the work of feeding the babies. I don't even know if male hummingbirds know where babies come from, but um, these families are really cool. The nest has to grow because it starts out just as a little incubation thing, and then it's a bassinet, and it's the same nest as those two little eggs grow into, each a chick almost as big as mom before they leave. So the nest has to change to a crib and then expand to a big kid bed. And the way it does that is they weave spider silk together that's nice and stretchy. They don't use any little twigs that would make it hard for it to stretch. They just put little bits of lichen and moss on it to give it a little camouflage and a little structural strength. But they build a new nest for each brood, and the males are doing all that important work to make sure she has her food. So they even chase away cool little moths. And they start migrating as soon as the females have finished fledging babies. Now, she's not going to have sex anymore and she doesn't need him anymore. So he migrates first. He's had all summer where he hasn't depleted his own food resources feeding babies. So he can be gone. And then she's going to leave when her body fat is restored, leaving the babies entirely on their own, exactly the way loons do it. And they do this where the adults leave before the babies for the same reason, so they can be sure those babies will have enough food to build up their own body fat and muscle so they can migrate. When we start getting droughts in late summer, that would be very bad as we're depleting the flowers if not only the babies but the adult females all have to get food. So they leave so there'll be enough food left for the babies. Another till death do us part is the herring gull. They are extremely romantic when they finally get a mate. They live in these apartment complexes that don't have walls between the apartments, but they all know where the walls are. And they're extremely devoted to their mate and keeping everybody away from their personal apartment there as they raise their babies. And they herring gulls are just kind of romantic raising these little guys, and they start out adorably cute and they get a little gangly as they get bigger, but it's very romantic, and they tend to go back to the same spot year after year if they had success. And the pair stays very devoted throughout the time they're both alive. Another till death do us part are loons, but they do it a different way. The loons fall in love with their lake. That's what they return to. And as long as the same mate returns and knows all the ins and outs of the lake, the male and the female are each in charge of chasing off any loons of their sex off the lake. And they both have a real edge over invaders because they've already nested there. When a lake is first opened up, when neither loon returns, then there's a lot of squabbling and fighting before two different loons win, and then they're with each other. But once they're with each other, that defines who they'll be with on that lake until one of them gets killed. But they're extremely devoted on fresh water. They're not the least bit romantic on salt water. In the wintertime, loons from Minnesota mainly go down to the Gulf of Mexico. Some follow the Great Lakes and end up on the Atlantic and go down that way. But wherever individuals wintered, they come back to their lake. They don't necessarily stay together during the winter, but they come back to their lake, and that's when they get all romantic. And in Wisconsin and Minnesota now, most loons seem to be nesting on artificial platforms. They have these poles sticking up on two ends. The loons have no trouble coming and going because they're dropping into the water. But when bald eagles or herring gulls come, their wings are wider than those poles, so they won't go down and steal the eggs. So they have much more nesting success. Also, these rise and fall with the changing lake level. They're anchored, but with a longer rope than you would need, so it can go up when the water goes up. So that is safer than right along the shore where it can get inundated if we have too much rain. But here's a perfect where loons nest here. And the whole point is to raise baby loons. The parents often divide them. One goes one way with one baby and one goes another way with the other baby. Another way, loons are like hummingbirds, as they always lay two eggs. And so, but with loons, it's so the parents can each raise one, and they'll come together. In Wisconsin now, the loons are very often joining with um, uh, they'll find somebody on a pontoon boat and they'll swim over with the baby, and then the parent will go off fishing while the baby is alone by the pontoon boat, because loons have figured out that the people on the pontoon boat leave the baby alone, but bald eagles are scared to come near a pontoon boat. So it's one way they've figured out of protecting their babies. And it takes the parent loons a while to figure out what the babies can swallow. That adult ended up eating the fish because the baby just looked so confused. How am I supposed to swallow that, mom or dad? The baby loons look like this, and the adult loons molt all their flight feathers not on their breeding lake, but once they get on the ocean, when they can swim to different places, if they run out of fish in one spot, they can go to another spot by swimming. They don't do that in the summer, but the baby loons stay on the Gulf of Mexico or on the Atlantic, usually for 3 to 4 years before they ever try to come to a freshwater lake, get romantic, and stake out their own territory. It's very tricky, and a lot of them die when they can't, they get killed by other loons. Loons are vicious. One time I was teaching an elder hostel class up on the Boundary Waters, and a dead goldeneye was on the shore, and it had a stab wound right in its lower breast, right under the ribs and or the sternum, and there was the stab wound that was exactly the size of a loon bill, and it had just come up under the water and stabbed it. And why couldn't a goldeneye get away? But I looked, and one of the goldeneye, it was an adult female, it was at least 2 years old, and so it had survived at least one full year of migration at least. And but then it must have had babies, and um, it had one deformed foot where it didn't where the it was open between the webbing, and so one foot wasn't as effective at the other at paddling, and it had managed just fine for at least a year. But the one time it really needed to scurry away in a hurry, it couldn't do it, and it got killed by a loon. But they do that because of love and raising their own babies, and they do not want to share. Another till death do us part bird is the bald eagle, but bald eagles don't seem as tenderly devoted to their mate as herring gulls and pigeons and swans and geese are. It seems like for bald eagles, the reason they stay together forever is because they're passionately in love with the nest and they can't work out a property settlement. So they both keep coming back to the nest. But during the time they're together, they have to prove how safe they're going to be. These are birds with ginormous talons. They could really do some damage. In many raptors, the female is significantly larger than the male. And it's especially noticed in the accipiters, the ones that are killing other birds. And when you have two different sizes, you have one of them can get the bigger one can get the blue jays and grackles and larger birds. The other one is quicker and can get the littler birds. So that's why there's two sizes. But the reason it's the female who's the larger, first off, she's incubating the eggs and she'll be able to share more of her body warmth without losing as much as the smaller one would do. But also, when they are actually mating, he is on her back with his talons. If he forgot for an instant that she was his mate and she suddenly looked like lunch, it would be bye bye birdie if he was the bigger, tougher, stronger one. So the female is the bigger one, but they're both having to count on that other bird sticking around for a long, long nesting season and raising the babies, coming back constantly with food. And the way they judge each other is by their amazing flying rituals. And it's just so wonderful to see. But then they're building a nest and they'll come back to that nest as long as the tree stands. They often start building another nest too. These guys love home improvement projects. They keep working on that nest and on a backup nest the whole time they're around before they migrate in the fall. And the whole point is to raise these gangly little babies. This nest was right next to somebody's fishing pier in Wisconsin, so it was very easy to take that picture. And this is, I used to teach junior high school, and this is my only bald eagle pooping shot, so I have to throw that in. But they're so working on that nest, making sure it's strong and cleaning it up, putting new sticks over it and a new bottom that fills the gap so the egg doesn't fall through spaces in the sticks. And it's just amazing how romantic they can do. Another till death do us part bird is the little screech owl. Interestingly, when they do banding studies on mated screech owls, they tend to be the same age. Now and they mate for life, but often one bird gets killed and the other one has to find a mate. It's easy to understand how young screech owls finding their first mate find one the same age because most of the birds looking are that age. But when you're an older bird, you're 6 years old and you need a mate because yours just died, somehow they manage to find birds that are 5, 6, or 7 years old. They find birds the same age and nobody knows exactly how they achieve that. They care much more about the same age than whether or not they have the same color plumage between the gray and the red morphs. So as you get older, an older screech owl wants you more. I had a screech owl as an education bird for 17 years. This is Archimedes. And every time a new Harry Potter book came out, I got to go to the midnight book release with Archimedes, and I was Professor McGonagall to explain to children how real owls work versus Hedwig and Pigwidgeon. But screech owls are they stay in the same place. They tend to have a few cavities for one pair, and they share the hunting grounds with other screech owls. It's like that's the common ground where they have a few condos and they can go to different condos to sleep. So sometimes you'll have a pair sleeping in different places, but they also will sleep in the same cavity, which is totally different from black-capped chickadees, but we'll get to them in a minute. But they're only defending those other ones in case something bad happens to the one they're in. Cavities are prime real estate for birds who must nest and roost in cavities, but cannot build their own. And so that's why they defend so many as a pair. And they're very devoted. They nuzzle each other. Intriguingly, screech owls are one species of owl that has a fairly high incidence of cannibalism, meaning eating other screech owls. But they're extremely devoted to their mate for life and to their babies. And there is actually a case of a male screech owl who there was a flicker nesting in the same tree and he lost his mate and he spent the rest of the breeding season trying to feed the baby flickers. Well, first he was brooding the eggs when the parents were gone. When they would come back, he would just go up to his own place, but then he would brood the eggs and he would try to feed little mouse bits to flickers, and they eat ants, so the parents feed the babies by regurgitation, and he could not master that trick, so the babies didn't get any food from him, but he was devoted to them the whole time. Great horned owls are another till death do us part. They have a large territory and they very often don't sleep side by side except when they have babies. But they get very romantic right around Valentine's Day. And I this year I bought some cams so I could get pictures and videos at my bird feeders. And one morning, when I looked at what I'd had that night, I had this picture. He or she had been on my feeder, and I got this little video. And it was just so cool because I had no idea one had been in the yard except for this evidence, but that was pretty cool. And then he flew away just a few seconds after the video ends because um, that was it for pictures. when they call, the males are smaller than the females, but the males have a deeper voice. And how can that be? We all know that a cello has a deeper voice than a violin. The bigger the instrument, the lower the sound. But the males have a bigger syrinx and a bigger skull, not brain, but their skull is bigger and there's more area for the sound to become resonant. So they have their whoo, 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 whoo. And if you're hearing two screech owls calling back and forth, you can tell that it's a mated pair because one will have a slightly lower voice, but slightly but noticeable than the female. So they're so romantic and they puff out those white feathers. That's part of their thing. And again, like bald eagles and other raptors, they have powerful talons. So they have to do a lot of romantic behavior to get both of their guards down enough so that they can actually mate. And the whole point is to lay these pure white eggs that are rather spherical rather than what we call egg shaped, and the little babies are adorable. They usually use old hawk nests, and this was in downtown Cleveland. This was in Ithaca, New York. Can you see in the hole that there is one on her eggs? And they're raising those babies, and the babies will stick with the parents into the fall. Then they're going to scatter. You start hearing a lot of hooting right around that time as they're working out where the babies can have a safe place without other adults chasing them away. And now they're hooting again because they're romantic. And so I've been hearing hooting. I heard it this morning at 1:15 a.m. and my husband heard some last night. There's a pair somewhere in my neighborhood. Another till death do us part is the crow, and most of what we know about nesting crows comes from Cornell, from Kevin McGowan, who was wonderful. When I wrote my crow thing, he went through it. I compared them to Nick and Nora Charles of the Thin Man movies. They're extremely devoted, as much in love as Nick and Nora, but they're very proper with each other. They like privacy for their private acts. So there's that, this overt um, kind of thing that you would see in more modern movies. These are old fashioned tender romantics, and they do all these romantic little movements together. And you can tell spring is really coming when you see crows carrying sticks and nesting materials. And this is one of the nests Kevin was going to ban the babies, and people anywhere near Ithaca tell him when their crows are nesting in their yard. They tend to be in pine or spruce trees. They build their own nest. They build a new nest each year. They try to raise 5 babies, and they're very devoted about it. The male feeds the female when she's on the nest. Sometimes their young from previous years, especially their sons, stick around for a year or two helping too. And the goal is to feed these little tiny babies with the bright red mouths, and then they grow into crows. And Kevin has all of them in Ithaca marked with a wing tag on both wings, and they're a different color background and or paint from one year to the next, so he can just look, tell what year they were hatched, but also looking at the letters and or numbers, he traces each individual. And that's how we know how devoted and long-standing crow family relationships are. It's not just the parents and the babies from that year. They remember their young, they know their neighbors, and they're really devoted. In my yard, I had 4 babies fledge, and the whole family would come to my feeder for quite a while. So I had all 6 in the family coming. but the pair stay together year round and often are with their young from previous years too, in their winter flocks. Some birds, especially little ones, don't have the luxury of mating for life and staying with their mate. They're either doing a long migration or they have complicated winter relationships. Black-capped chickadees do tend to mate for life once they pick up a mate, but it's they are totally into social distancing, for one thing. Even with their mate, they never sleep. The male never sleeps in the nest cavity. She's the one who does all the incubating and all the nest cavity stuff. He's in his own cavity. And the only time chickadees ever sleep in a cavity with other chickadees is the babies that one nesting season, and then the female while she's incubating those babies. But as soon as the babies can maintain their own body warmth, she'll find her own cavity to sleep in. They're not, they feel uncomfortable being too close to them. And they remind me in all their proper behaviors of Jane Austen. So, uh, they love having this little cavity, but it is a truth universally acknowledged that a single chickadee in possession of a good territory must be in want of a mate. They lead lives more provincial than Jane Austen did, staying within their neighborhood and associating with a small circle of acquaintances season after season, year after year. When baby chickadees fledge, they stay with their parents, and then all of a sudden, by summer's end, each baby has joined a different winter flock away from its parents and its siblings. And it will stay in that flock usually pretty much for life. Sometimes there's some switching of flocks at the end of summer to, especially if there's a lot of babies and there's going to be more flocks in a good year. But their mate stays with them in whichever flock, but they have strictly a platonic, very proper relationship. To the undiscerning eye, their existence may appear to be nothing more than a quick succession of busy nothings, but like Austen readers, observant birders will notice individuals and their relationships and dramas within any chickadee flock. As in Austen's world, chickadee flocks have a strict, stable social hierarchy, and chickadees become marriageable the spring after their first winter. That hierarchy, the top male is invariably mated to the top female, and second and third and fourth. Now, if the second in line male dies, the female doesn't the males don't shift up, then she picks a male who does already have a mate from the bottom of the social hierarchy ladder. But that's the only time there's any kind of movement between classes in chickadees. Young chickadees start at the bottom of the social ladder, rising in rank as they get older, and pairs are composed of birds of equal standing. Elizabeth Bennet could have been a chickadee when she noted about Darcy, "He is a gentleman, I am a gentleman's daughter, so far we are equal." Some infidelity occurs with chickadees, as Mrs. Bennet might have noted. I assure you there is quite as much of that going on with chickadees as with people. They probably cannot fix on which hour or glance or words laid the foundation, but for yet another season they settle into domestic felicity. And these are chickadees that fledged across the street from me, so I had to take pictures. Another complicated one is the house wren. They're the singing Casanova, and if you know what Casanova means, it means new house. And that's what house wrens are all into, real estate. The males will find as many suitable cavities as they can, sing to advertise, and stuff them with sticks. And the females will find a male As soon as she comes in, he becomes totally devoted once she mates with him. And as she lays the eggs, he will be so devoted, so focused on the babies, and so just the greatest father in the world. She'll be the greatest mother. But the whole time they're nesting, he keeps singing. That's alerting other females that he may be available pretty soon. And the females are listening to the other males singing. Once the babies fledge the nest, very often the female leaves and finds one of those other advertising males. And the first male does all the work of taking care of the fledglings. Sometimes they both stick around for several days before she lights out. Then, while he's still taking care of babies, he's still singing, attracts a new female, and she can be laying eggs while he's still taking care of the fledglings. So when they're finally independent, that's when the new eggs are hatching. He can get focused on them. That's how they maximize the number of baby house wrens, because they don't weigh much and they have a long, dangerous migration. Bluebirds are pretty complicated too. They have all these fancy little things that they do to attract each other, but the males can't help it. They're eyeing the chick next door, and they do quite a bit of uh, romance between them. His babies in his nest are the ones he's feeding, and he fortunately never demands a paternity test first to decide which babies to feed, because she very often has a few eggs in there that are not fathered by him. But he never seems to know that, even though he may be eyeing the other birds too. So they are not the most, it's not what you would call uh, a really, it's sort of an Arnold Schwarzenegger, Maria Shriver sort of thing. Robins also are complicated. They very often stay with the same mate the whole season as long as they're having good luck. But they're staying together. His singing is helping bond her and keep her there. And the males start squabbling like this early in spring. They need to each claim a territory. The females are drawn not to the male so much as the territory. The males who sing the best get the best territories, and the females know that. And males are and females are a little bit stupid when they see a robin reflection. They have not figured out what my baby grandson already has at 5 months, that a reflection is him. They think it's an invader on their territory, and it makes the males especially angry, because the first time they see a reflection, they often go and sing, and nobody sings back. So he's sure, yeah, this is my territory. And he goes back, and there's that upstart again. So he wants to drive him away, and that drives people insane. They cannot build their nest until after a rain because they need mud, but also they need worms. But they like wet stuff for making the nest. And they do all this mating just to raise babies, and the babies eat a lot of mud too, as you can tell. But they, when they migrate, the pairs do not stay together, and unless there was really good success, both of them don't go back to the same territory in the spring. If they have really good luck, you can have the same two birds. But robins are a pain in the patootie to band because they very often drop feathers. So banders have not spent a lot of time researching backyard robins to see how many of them actually do return year after year. Mockingbirds are the Othellos of the bird world. The females are attracted to mockingbirds that have the longest, most complicated songs. Their songs are a string of imitations of other things that they have experienced in their life. He might be singing, "Look, I once had an encounter with a lawnmower. Listen, I once encountered a cell phone. Listen, I once encountered a bluebird." and a brown thrasher. And his song is telling her all his experiences. He's building up his repertoire throughout life to get a longer and longer string. And females are attracted to the males who have the most complicated long songs. They're like Othello, who attracted Desdemona by telling her all the stories of his adventures in the wars. And that's why she fell in love with him. So that's mockingbirds. And the whole point is to raise baby mockingbirds, and the pair stays together. If he loses his mate, he will, that's when they sing all night long, is when it's a male without a mate. And in case any females are migrating, nocturnal migration, and notice, or things like that. But that's when the males sing all night. And Walt Whitman wrote the most tragical poem about a mockingbird, that I have a section of in the book, because it is really comical how he actually understood what they were saying. White-throated sparrows are very bizarre. There's what they compare to having four sexes. You have two color morphs in white-throated sparrows. You have the white striped and the tan striped. And half of white striped birds are males and half are females. Half of tan striped birds are males and half are females. But 98 or higher percent of all pairs have one of each. And the reason for that, the white striped birds are extremely territorial and aggressive. And both sexes sing a lot. The tan striped are very nurturing. They're very much focused on raising babies, and they're very much not all that territorial. The males sing, but the females don't sing at all, and even the males don't sing all that aggressively. So I used to compare it to Gone with the Wind, with the white striped male and female being Scarlet and Rhett, and the tan striped being Melanie and Ashley. Only it ends, Scarlet snares Ashley and Rhett has Melanie. In laboratory studies, all the males want the white striped female. She prefers Ashley. But if Rhett manages to spend some time with Scarlet, the moment she starts singing, he gets in a total uproar and chases her away because he can't stand hearing another white-throated sparrow singing near him. So that's how it settles out that Melanie ends up with Ashley, and all the females prefer Ashley. They all prefer the tan-striped males in laboratory studies. Red-winged blackbirds are not the marrying kind. They're in a hippie commune year-round, males mating with any females on their territory, but the females will move to other territories, so the nests seldom have just one male's baby. And they're one big happy family, sort of. And in the wintertime, you have them all mixing together in these ginormous flocks. And at bedtime, it tends to be the older birds in the center, and the poor younger birds get stuck on the outskirts, but then they end up, um, you end up with a big flock still. And come spring, all the females prefer older males, but everybody has some romance with redwings because they're pretty indiscriminate. It's complicated for cardinals. They get very romantic. Females have a more complex, cool song than males do, but they don't sing nearly as often as males do. It's strictly around the nesting. Her song has to express more information to the male than his song has to express to hers. But the male and female both sing. He feeds her. It's all so romantic to raise their babies, and sometimes they stick together through the winter, but sometimes they just kind of move on, and sometimes they have a little hanky panky going on. but it's all so romantic. And that's where I will end. That's my dog, Pip. I hope you all stay safe and well. And thanks for coming. I hope I didn't put you to sleep. I'm very good at putting him to sleep. And I will answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Laura. That was great.
Oh, thanks.
So I don't know if anybody typed in some questions into the chat room, but feel free to do that or raise your hand or unmute yourself and speak.
Jump right in.
I had a question about the screech owls, Laura, which was, we often see them here in a place called Woods, but they're always solitary. And I wondered whether they're paired, the other half of them are somewhere else in that wood, or they not stay together during non-mating season.
They can be together or not all year. If they have enough little condos, they will often each be in a different one, so they can be sure that nobody's stealing either one. Sometimes people have noticed they only have one, but some days it's gray and some days it's red. And that's because they take turns in the other one. A lot of pairs are, one of each, but a lot of pairs are just one color. So even if you're seeing one gray one day after day, if it's not banded, you can't be 100% sure which one it is.
Aha. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else?
Dominic has a.
You have worked on Caprimulga, and could you say what is the leading cause of why we're losing birds like common nighthawk?
Common nighthawk, purple martin, and other birds that are 100% insectivore and have to catch flying insects. Purple martins probably even have a little more flexibility than nighthawks do. When I rehabbed nighthawks, I discovered that they cannot pick up food in their mouths. I could have the most succulent moth walk right past a nighthawk, and all it could do is open its mouth and hope the moth would walk in. It cannot pick it up. Its beak is this very fragile little thing on the outside of this very soft mouth. And its tongue is just a little tiny vestigial flap in the back of the mouth, right at the throat. So the tongue and beak are worthless for picking up food. The way nighthawks get 100% of their nutrition after they are not being fed by a parent is flying into the bugs with their mouth wide open, and the bugs go down the hatch. And so when we have lost a huge number of flying insects. Mayflies that used to be every year in the Chicago Tribune, they'd mention some bridge in Chicago that had been closed so the snowplows could come through and push off all the mayflies. And we don't get that anymore. That is not a regular thing in big cities and in smaller cities. The decline in insects is the #1 cause. For a while, common nighthawks were nesting on flat roofed buildings in big numbers in cities and towns, but we've started constructing those roofs different, for one thing, so that they don't have they used to have stones on top of the tar paper, and so it was like being on, a rocky ground. But now they have what they call clad roofs, where they're smooth. The eggs can roll toward the drainage, and they get very, very hot. There are banders who have caught nighthawks with blistered feet from the hot substrate, but also crows and ring-billed gulls in particular have figured out how to capitalize on eating their eggs on roofs. So between the urban predation, but especially the pesticides and other reasons that our flying insect population have so declined is the main things that have happened to nighthawks and whippoorwills.
Thank you.
Laura, my name is Hans, and on New Year's morning at 3 a.m., my wife heard a great horned owl calling. So I got up and got dressed and snuck up on it, if there is such a thing. And it was, in my life, I've either seen great horned owls or hear them, but I never had a chance to really watch them hoot. And I snuck up on it again, and it just kept on calling. And what I thought was really interesting, when they hoot, they lean forward and put their all into the hoot.
Yeah.
And it was really interesting. And it was a clear, calm, moonlit night. It was just a really wonderful experience.
Oh, that sounds wonderful. And did you see the white throat puffing out?
No, it was a little too dark for that. I didn't have the right binoculars, I guess. But
But
in
you
the
had the shape.
yeah. And it was just neat. I would lean forward and its tail would kind of go up because it was giving its all. And in the distance, I could hear another owl calling. And that's probably why this owl let me get so close and
Yeah, it was
kept
probably
on
focused.
calling. Yeah.
What a cool story. We had a Springer Spaniel puppy, and one fall I took her out at midnight, and she was liver colored with one little white spot on her back. And when I let her nose around, a saw-whet owl saw her and must have seen the white spot and thought it was this cool little rodent. And it zooms in, and right at the last second, it realizes that's not a mouse, it's a whole puppy. And it had to fly, it like put on the brakes. It was really cool to watch, and it went up into the tree. Now, when I've seen saw-whet owls in the daytime, they're sitting so zen-like and still, but it was actively hunting. So it's sitting in my tree and looking every which way. It's just that whole body was moving, and every now and then it would make eye contact with me, and it was so startling and cool. Owls hold still during the daytime, and also when they close their eyelids, they can close their eyelids almost the entire way and just have them open a slit and can see perfectly clearly. So we don't even realize, we think they're sleeping, like we could really sneak up on something with that kind of hearing. But they, like yours, was not worried about you. It was focused on that owl, but it probably was aware you were there. It just was blowing you off because it wanted to let that other one know. A lot of birds have the anti-Woody Guthrie song. I always say robins are singing, "This land is my land, this land is my land, this land's not your land, this land is my land." And, when owls are hooting to their own sex, that's what they're saying, but it might have just been singing some romantic duet too.
Looks
Any
like
other
Ralph
questions?
has a question.
Hmm?
Looks like Ralph has a question. He's got his hand up.
Hi, yes, that's me. Great presentation. Really loved it. I had a question about, I think you mentioned that it was the house wren that had the round egg.
No, the great horned owl.
Oh, okay. And I was kind of wondering if that's unique to have a round egg, and if that maybe has something to do with space saving, or what would be the reason for that?
It probably has to do partly with it being, they nest in either a cavity or in a nice sturdy cup nest. And white eggs tend to be cavity eggs. With owls, I think it helps them see the eggs so they don't crush it. We have the longest eggs in places where the eggs can roll.
Right.
And it's usually kind of a gradation between where it can roll and where it can't roll. Is but nobody's ever figured out exactly why bird eggs are shaped the way they are.
Thank you.
Interesting. Yeah.
It looks like Bill and Ginny also have a question.
Hi, Laura.
Hi.
Ginny and I met Laura when we lived in Duluth. So we had the pleasure of living in Duluth for 12 years. On the other
I remember you guys.
and Laura was wonderful. You know, we would invite her. I worked at a nature center in Minnesota, in Duluth, and we invite Laura to speak every so often. And she was such a rock star that she would draw in a lot of people. So it was very helpful. But I want to point out, you know, we own this book, one of her first books, and we bought this, I think, in '95, or maybe it was a gift. But For the Birds, an uncommon guide. And the year we bought it, we were just by ourselves. Each night we would read the date. You know, it goes through 365 little bits of information about birds and about Laura's life. And we'd read that passage, and then we'd write down our birds from that day. And so we have warm memories from you, Laura. And it's nice to see you again.
Thank you.
And I was going to ask you a question. Did you participate in the Christmas bird count up there?
No, because I did just took a much shorter route than I usually do, did most of it from the house because I've got childcare duty occasionally now.
Okay, that's awesome. That's awesome. Do you know how the count went this year?
Yeah, it did really well. I think we got some new species, yellow-bellied sapsucker that we'd never had before on a Christmas bird count. And maybe one other, there were 2 flickers. You can really tell from Christmas bird counts that climate change is changing things.
Thank you. Nice
Yeah,
to see you.
Great to see you.
Nice to see you guys.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Well, Laura, thank you so much again for joining us tonight and sharing all your knowledge about birds. It was wonderful. We really enjoyed it. And I think now I'll turn it back to Liz because I think we have to hear the results of the election. And also a reminder that next month we will have Alan Strong as our speaker. Alan is David Strong's son, and Alan is going to speak about grassland birds. I don't know if David joined us tonight, but anyway, we're all looking forward to hearing about Alan's studies on grassland birds. So